All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you to Chapter 5. We're just going to talk about sections 1 through 3. This will get into some of the specifics that I want you to know. There's going to be a couple of things, of course, I like to review as we go. Maybe you've seen a video on this. Maybe you've already read about it. But this is just another supplement for you to use so that it'll help you be successful for our test covering information in Chapter 5. Now remember, the name of the chapter is Toward Independence. The question that we're asking, okay, and this is the overarching, what we call essential question. When is it necessary for citizens to rebel against their government? Now remember, a citizen is just a member of a country, okay? And the citizens we're talking about are the colonial citizens that live in North America, but they are citizens of Great Britain, okay? So it's going to be colonial citizens going against the British Parliament or the British government. So I want you to think about that. When is it necessary for citizens to rebel against their government? So a couple of groups that we need to make sure we understand. Two terms that are crucial to helping us understand the things that led the United States towards independence. We've got a group called the Loyalists, and we've got a group called the Patriots. Okay, now loyalists is exactly how it sounds. These are people that live in the colonies that are loyal to Great Britain. So they're going to agree with the British government. They're going to agree with what King George is doing in the colonies. Okay, now remember, there was only about 15 or 20% of people living in the American colonies that were considered loyalists. Okay, and these people had great deep loyalty to Great Britain. And then that brings us to the Patriots, and these guys are basically the opposite of loyalists. Okay, these were Americans who believed that colonies had the right to govern themselves. Okay, now there's something I want to make sure you understand. Patriots did not make up the difference between or of the citizens in the Americas. The Patriots were a small percentage of people as well, but they were able to drum up support and convince people in the middle that independence and governing themselves was the best way to go. So I want you to think about that. We've got loyalists and patriots. Loyalists loyal to Great Britain. Patriots want independence. They want to govern themselves. Okay, so we've got our two different people. See, the guy's got a sword. He's ready to fight. Okay, so here we go. French and Indian War. A couple of things we got to know about the French and Indian War. This took place the 7 years prior to 1763. Okay, so this is while the United States is not independent from Great Britain. Great Britain is fighting a war against France for land in North America. Okay, so now what were some significant events of the French and Indian War? This is what we've got. The capture of Fort Duquesne by the British. Okay, huge deal. Fort Duquesne is what we now know as the city of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. They captured that, which gives them control of the Ohio River Valley. Okay, when William Pitt became Prime Minister of Great Britain, he put a lot of money into the war. Okay, he felt it was very important to control as much land as possible in North America, and that includes Canada. And British ultimately captures Canada. Canada, we know, is still really part of the Commonwealth, essentially, of Great Britain today. Okay, so those are three things that we need to know about the French and Indian War. What was important about the outcome of this war? That Great Britain ultimately won. For colonists, the future looks very, very bright. Okay, they're stoked. Great Britain had their back. They're, protecting them against Native Americans that live there. They're not going to have to deal with the French anymore. So the colonists are like, yeah, look at this. Great Britain's got our back. This is awesome. Okay, so they're really, really excited about being British citizens. Okay, now remember, this is where George Washington got his start. Okay, it was in the French and Indian War. So all of a sudden everybody's like, yeah, we're British colonists. We won this war. We're feeling really good. Okay, so those are some things that we need to know about the French and Indian War. Now, things start to change a little bit, and we'll talk about this here as we move forward. Okay, three things that the British did to colonies that the colonists viewed to be unfair. So after the war, okay, some things start happening that really start making some of the colonists really upset. So we've got American colonists versus the British government. Now remember, the British government is controlling the American colonies, right? They're the ones that make the laws, and do everything for the colonies. They really, before the French and Indian War, essentially left the colonies alone. The colonies were able to make their own laws. But now, after the war, the British government wants to start taxing the colonies and things like that, and we'll talk about it here in just a moment. So here we have American colonists versus the British government. So we're going to look for 3 things that they viewed as unfair. First one, Proclamation of 1763. Hopefully this is familiar to you. Okay, what was it? Well, it stopped the colonists from moving west of the Appalachian Mountains. They said you can't move farther west than the Appalachian Mountains, okay? So you see the Proclamation line here on the map. That was the line. It basically ran right along the Appalachian Mountains on the east coast. And that's really what were the colonies. When you think of the original 13 colonies, the ones to the east of the Proclamation line was that, okay? So King George wanted to keep colonists and Native Americans from killing each other. I mean, that's really why he did it. He was like, okay, we fought against these guys, we signed a treaty, we got to keep the peace. And that's really what he wanted to do with the Proclamation of 1763. So how did the colonists react? Of course, they didn't like it. Colonists were already settling beyond the mountains. There were tons of people that were already like moving out there, and they were living on the frontier, okay? And so they were getting pushed back east. So they basically had to leave their homes that they had spent years building. Okay, it was kind of crazy. And basically the colonists argued that this was what we call tyranny, a word you need to know, or an unjust use of power. Okay, how did the British react to the colonists' objections? They basically ignored them, and then they sent in more troops to kind of keep the peace. And by keeping the peace, they were the guys kicking these settlers off their land. Okay, so it wasn't a good start after the French and Indian War. We got the Stamp Act. Anytime you see like the word act when we're talking about this, we're talking about a law. So the Stamp Act is what we're talking about right now. So this is a law or something that was set in place by the British government. So why was the Stamp Act passed? Well, wars cost money. Great Britain wanted to pay the debt that they incurred from the French and Indian War. I mean, you got to pay the troops, you got to buy uniforms, you got to feed them, you got to pay for guns, ammo, that kind of stuff. So here we have, this is why they put this new tax in place, this new law, okay? What was the Stamp Act? So this Prime Minister, George Grenville, passed a law that required the colonists to use stamped paper for anything that required the use of paper. So that means if you wanted to write a letter to your grandma, you had to buy this piece of paper that had a stamp on it, and you had to pay for that stamp to use that paper. If you were signing a contract for a house that you bought or a deal that you made, you had to buy this stamp for your paper and just for the use of that paper. I want you to start thinking about anything that you use paper. There's a lot of stuff. Anything. Okay? I want you to think about that for a second. So there's the stamp that was used, and they put it on anything that was made of paper. So it really got a lot of people upset. They're like, I use paper. Why is it so expensive? Okay? So there we have the colonists upset. Couple of things. How did they react? Well, here you are. This is an angry mob. Parliament has no right to tax the colonists because they were upset because they used to make their own laws. Now they've got the British government telling them they have to pay taxes and things like that. Okay? No taxation without representation. They were upset because they didn't have a say in it. Okay? That's what that means, that they shouldn't be taxed unless they have a vote on a particular law. Okay, so that's what no taxation without representation means. And of course, this word again, tyranny, unjust use of power. What was the response? After seeing the reactions of the colonists, Parliament repealed, a word you need to know, or canceled. That's really what repealed means. So they basically canceled the Stamp Act because the colonists were so upset. And really, that's what we're talking about here. So there you have the Stamp Act. That was the second thing. Quartering Act, the last one. This one gets a little interesting. What was the Quartering Act? Required colonists to allow soldiers that were stationed in the colonies to stay at their houses or quarter them. Okay? So when you quarter somebody, you're allowing them to stay at your place. Okay? what is that going to look like? A couple of questions I want you to think about. Why did the colonists feel like this was another tax? So if you've got somebody staying at your house, what are they generally going to be doing? Think about some things that when somebody stays at your house, what do you need to provide for them? Okay, I want you to think about that for a second. Why would they see this as another tax? Okay. Who's paying for the things that they need to provide for these soldiers? So think about that. How did the British respond to the colonial protests to the Quartering Act? Well, they refused to allow the New York Assembly to meet until they agreed to obey the act, okay? So now we got to understand, what's the New York Assembly? This is kind of like New York's government, okay? Assembly is just like this group of people. It's not official, but it was official to the colonists, okay? So this is kind of like New York's government. So all of a sudden, Great Britain comes in and says, no, you guys can't meet anymore, sorry, unless you follow the Quartering Act.